Welcome to Soul Stories, your home for heart-touching tales of love, hope, and second chances. If you believe in the power of kindness and the magic of unexpected connections, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our growing family. Now let's begin today's story. St. Augustine Church in Havenport stood tall like a stone mausoleum, its gray moss-covered walls whispering secrets of centuries past. Inside, the air was heavy, thick with the scent of lilies and candle wax, a sweetness so cloying it clung to every breath Claire Whitmore took. Light from the stained glass windows above shattered into fragments of rainbow on the cold stone floor, but it could not chase away the chill tightening around her heart. The ivory wedding gown, intricately beaded with pearls, clung to her body like a gilded cage. The bouquet of white roses in her hand felt unbearably heavy, a reminder that this wasn't her choice. It was the legacy of a vow she never made. Beside Claire stood Declan Maddox, tall, composed, his sharply tailored black suit accentuating an appearance so flawless it bordered on intimidating. His face, chiseled, cold, with eyes as deep as the sea before a storm, was the stuff of dreams for every girl in Havenport. But to Claire, he was a stranger, a signature on a marriage contract drafted by her father. She had never loved him. She wasn't even sure she could endure him. Every time she searched his gaze for some hint of real emotion, all she saw was emptiness, like a wall of stone she could never break through. The crowd in the church was a picture-perfect display of Havenport's elite. Silk dresses rustled, gold cufflinks glinted in the candlelight. They smiled, whispered, and pretended not to notice the tension choking the air. Claire glanced toward the front pew, where her father, Mayor Lawrence Whitmore, sat with his usual commanding posture. His eyes were sharp, void of warmth, and when their gazes met, he gave a single rigid nod, a silent command. "Do it. Don't disappoint me." Her mother wasn't beside him. Only an empty seat remained where Eleanor had once sat during every important occasion, before she passed away 3 years ago. Her absence cut through Claire like a blade, a reminder that her mother had lived a life caged by duty, and now Claire was following the same path. Claire tightened her grip on the bouquet, her nails digging into her palms, trying to suppress the rising panic. She remembered her mother's words in those final nights, spoken in a fragile, regretful voice. "Don't live like I did, Claire. Choose your heart." But all Claire could feel now was fear and doubt. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. But her father's gaze and the eyes of the crowd of all Havenport wrapped around her like chains, binding her to the altar. The priest, an elderly man with a voice as deep as a bronze bell, stepped forward. The crowd fell silent. He smiled gently, but to Claire that smile was just the sound of a cage locking shut. "Claire Whitmore," he began, his voice echoing through the still air, "do you take Declan Maddox to be your husband? To love and to cherish him, in wealth and in poverty, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Claire's heart pounded wildly, as if it were trying to escape her chest. Each beat was a cry for help. She looked at Declan, hoping for a reason, any reason, to say yes. But his eyes gave her nothing, only that blank, impenetrable wall. She turned to her father again, and now his nod carried the weight of a threat. Her mind spun. Memories rushed back. The arguments in their cold living room, his words echoing, "This wedding is a family obligation," and the nights she stared at the mirror, wondering who she was beneath all the suffocating expectations. She couldn't do it. Her voice broke, small as a breeze slipping through a cracked door. The crowd held its breath. She inhaled sharply, her chest aching, and then, like a flame rising from ash, she stepped back. The bouquet slipped from her hands, landing on the stone floor with a dry thud, white petals scattering like shards of a broken dream. "I don't know him." The entire church froze. Somewhere in the crowd, a sharp gasp cut through the silence. A man's cough shattered it further. Then came the murmurs, rising like wildfire through dry grass. What did she say? "She doesn't know him." "This is disgraceful." Claire felt her mind go blank, as if she had crossed a line with no return. Her father leapt to his feet, face red with fury, fists clenched. his eyes ablaze as if he could burn her alive with one look. Declan moved, just slightly, a flicker of a facial muscle, but remained as still and silent as a statue. She wanted to run, to rip off the gown and vanish, but her legs felt rooted in place. All she could do was stand there, nails digging into her palms, trying to hold on to the fragile spark of courage she had just ignited. In that moment, she could almost hear her mother's voice again, soft but resolute, whispering in her ear, "You did the right thing." Then suddenly, the heavy wooden doors of the church creaked open with a loud bang. All eyes turned to the entrance. A man stepped across the threshold, his silhouette stark against the backlit glow from outside. He wore a black coat with worn shoulders, his brown hair tousled, and in his hands was an old wooden box, its faded grain hinting at secrets untold. His footsteps echoed steadily down the aisle, each one like the beat of a fateful drum. "Sorry I'm late." His voice was low, gravelly, with a trace of unapologetic sarcasm. "But I believe there's something I need to share before this bride commits to a mistake." Claire stood frozen, eyes wide. There was something about him, his voice, his walk, the way he looked straight at her, that made her heart clench. A vague memory flickered through her like lightning in a fog. Rain, a wounded man, and a moment she had buried deep inside. But it was too hazy, too far away, like a dream she didn't dare believe was real. "Who are you?" Declan demanded, his voice sharp as a blade. But Claire detected something in his tone, a flicker of unease. The man stopped just short of the altar, a few steps away. He didn't look at Declan. He didn't glance at the crowd. His gaze never left Claire. A faint, sad smile played at his lips. Half sorrow, half defiance. "I'm the one who knows the truth," he said, lifting the wooden box, his fingers brushing the lid like he was touching a sacred secret. "And I'm here to make sure Claire doesn't pay the price for someone else's lies." The church was silent once more, save for the thundering of Claire's heart. And in that moment, she remembered him. St. Augustine Church was thick with chaos and suffocating tension. The murmur of the crowd swelled like a broken beehive, sharp gazes darting between shock and curiosity. Claire Whitmore stood frozen at the altar, her feet seemingly nailed to the cold stone floor, eyes locked on the man who had just stepped through the doorway. The wooden box in his hands, worn, faded, its swirling grain like a forgotten tale, seemed to draw every gaze in the room. But for Claire, it wasn't the box. It was his eyes, deep, brown, and stirring something inside her she had long buried. "What did you just say?" Declan Maddox's voice sliced through the air, cold as steel, though Claire caught a rare tremor in it. He took a step forward, shoulders rigid, as if his sheer presence might intimidate the intruder. "Who are you, and how dare you interrupt this day?" The man stopped midway down the aisle, just a few meters from the altar. He didn't answer right away, simply tilted his head slightly, a trace of a sardonic smile at the corner of his lips. "I'm Gabriel Monroe," he said, his voice deep and steady, as if the name alone explained everything. "Independent journalist, or, as some in Havenport might recall, the man who disappeared 4 years ago." The name dropped like a stone into still water. Gasps rippled through the pews, a flurry of shocked whispers rising behind them. "Gabriel Monroe? He's alive? I thought he was dead." Claire's mind spun, the floor beneath her seeming to tilt. Gabriel Monroe. That name cracked open a blurred memory, a puzzle piece long faded by time. She looked at him, the disheveled brown hair, the worn coat, those eyes full of pride and old wounds. Then, like lightning through fog, the image returned. A stormy night, a wounded man on her grandmother's porch, blood soaking his shirt, and a hoarse voice begging for help. She had saved him. 4 years ago, in her grandmother's old cabin on the outskirts of Havenport, Claire had bandaged a stranger's wounds, hidden him from those who hunted him. They had stayed up talking through the night, sharing bits of broken dreams, and in a rare, fragile moment, she'd let him hold her hand. But the next morning, he vanished. No goodbye, no trace. She'd thought he'd left her, or worse, that he'd died. And now here he was, alive, holding a wooden box, staring at her like those 4 years had never passed. "Claire," Gabriel said, his voice pulling her back to the present, gentle but unwavering. "I know what you're thinking, and I didn't come here to hurt you, but you need to know the truth. About today, about the man beside you, and about what your father has done." "The truth?" Her father, Mayor Lawrence Whitmore, rose from the front pew, his voice like thunder cutting through every whisper. "You're a liar, Monroe, a disgraced criminal wanted for slander and sabotage. You dare come in here and smear my family's name?" Gabriel didn't flinch. He raised the wooden box, his fingers brushing over the lid as if it were some sacred relic. "I don't need words to prove anything, Mr. Mayor," he replied with a faint, cutting smirk. "What's inside this box will speak for me. And trust me, it will force all of Havenport to reconsider what you call honor." Claire's heart pounded. She glanced at Declan, expecting him to deny it, refute everything, maybe even erupt in fury. But he just stood there, his deep blue eyes narrowing, lips pressed into a tight line, like a predator calculating his next move. His silence was more terrifying than any accusation. "Claire," Gabriel continued, his gaze locked on her, as if nothing else existed in the world. "This wedding isn't your choice. It's a performance, a carefully staged illusion meant to cover something far worse. Declan Maddox and your father, they're using you to legitimize a money laundering scheme through the Harbor Project. Millions have been funneled through Havenport Trust Bank, and you're the perfect distraction." His words hit Claire like a punch to the chest. Money laundering, the Harbor Project. She had always known her father was ambitious, sometimes ruthless, but illegal. And Declan, the man she was about to marry, was he part of it too? She turned to look at him, desperate for an explanation. But Declan only looked away, his fists clenched, jaw tight. "Enough!" Mayor Whitmore thundered, storming toward Gabriel. "You have no proof, just wild accusations from a failed man. Security, get him out of here." But before anyone could move, Gabriel opened the wooden box. Inside, nestled neatly, was an old leather-bound journal and a cream-colored envelope, sealed with worn red wax. He lifted the journal with reverence, his voice dropping to something near a prayer. "This is the journal of Eleanor Whitmore, Claire's mother. And this," he said, holding up the envelope, "is a letter she wrote to her daughter, never opened. Claire, you need to read it, not for me, but for yourself." Her mother's name sliced through her like a blade. Claire's eyes burned. Eleanor, gentle, kind, yet always living in her father's shadow, had passed away 3 years ago, leaving behind an emptiness Claire could never fill. A journal, a letter. How had Gabriel come to possess them? And why did he speak her mother's name like it was personal? "Give it to me," Claire said, her voice trembling but resolute. She stepped forward, her gown whispering across the stone floor, her eyes fixed on the box. The church fell dead silent, as if holding its breath. Gabriel handed her the journal and the letter. His fingers brushed hers. A brief, almost imperceptible touch, but it made her flinch. That feeling, warm, familiar, pulled her back to that rainy night 4 years ago, when she had held his hand and for a fleeting moment didn't feel alone. "Read it, Claire," he said, voice soft as a prayer, "and believe in yourself, right here, right now, not in me, not in your father, not in Declan, just in you." Claire held the journal, her fingers trembling as they ran over the worn leather cover. She looked at the envelope, the red wax seal a silent warning. She knew that once she opened it, there would be no turning back. But when her eyes met Gabriel's, she saw something else. Hope, a promise that even if the truth hurt, she wouldn't have to face it alone. St. Augustine Church now felt like a glass cage, every eye fixed on Claire Whitmore, as if she were the leading role in a play whose ending no one could predict. The murmurs had quieted, but the tension in the air remained, thick and storm-like. Claire stood in the aisle, her ivory wedding dress pooling around her feet like a reminder of the gilded cage she had just refused to enter. In her hands were her mother's leather-bound journal and the red wax-sealed letter, relics of Eleanor, who had left her 3 years ago. But Claire's eyes were locked on Gabriel Monroe, the man who had just turned her wedding upside down, the man she recognized the moment he crossed the threshold, even if her heart had begged her not to believe it was him. Gabriel stood tall, lean in his weathered coat, tousled brown hair catching bits of colored light from the stained glass above. His deep brown eyes held a mix of defiance and hurt. The moment he appeared, Claire's heart clenched like an old wound reopening. She remembered him, remembered that stormy night 4 years ago, remembered the wounded man she had sheltered in her grandmother's cottage. She remembered his eyes, tired but unbroken, and the way he held her hand like she was the only thing keeping him alive. But she also remembered the pain of waking up alone, with no explanation, only questions and the sting of betrayal. Now he was here, alive, and she didn't know whether to run into his arms or turn away to protect herself. "Claire," Gabriel's voice broke through her thoughts, gentle but firm. "I know you remember me. I saw it in your eyes the moment I walked in, but I also know you're angry, afraid. I owe you the truth, all of it, right now." She tightened her grip on the letter, her nails digging into her palm to keep herself from shaking. "You left me," she whispered, her voice thick with hurt. "You disappeared without a word, Gabriel. I looked for you, but there was nothing. I thought you were dead, or worse, that you didn't care. And now you show up, wreck my wedding, and you're holding—" She lifted the letter, her voice trembling. "This. How did you get my mother's journal? And why should I believe a word you say?" The church held its breath. Her father, Mayor Lawrence Whitmore, stood red-faced in the front row, but for now said nothing. Declan Maddox, the groom she no longer wanted, stared at Gabriel with cold fury, but Claire no longer cared about their silence or their rage. She wanted the truth, no matter how painful it was. Gabriel stepped closer, a prism of light from the stained glass falling across his face, carving shadows into his tired features. "I didn't leave you, Claire," he said quietly, his voice rough but sincere. "Let me tell you what happened that night, the night you saved me." His voice, steady and low, became a current pulling her backward in time. "It was a stormy night in Havenport. I was investigating a corruption ring tied to the harbor project, a front for laundering money. Your father and men like Declan were behind it. I got too close. They found me, attacked me. I barely escaped with my life. I stumbled through the woods and collapsed near your grandmother's cottage. I didn't know it was yours. And then you found me, Claire. You pulled me inside, patched up my shoulder, and gave me shelter in that attic." Memories surged in waves. Claire blinked, seeing the old cottage again, her sanctuary from her father's suffocating control. She saw Gabriel then, collapsed on the floor, blood staining his shirt, eyes glazed with pain but burning with fight. She remembered her fingers trembling as she cleaned his wound, the warmth of his skin under her touch. They had talked until dawn, about broken dreams, about Havenport's golden cage, and in that fragile silence Gabriel had reached for her hand, lacing his fingers with hers like he feared she'd vanish. "You told me about your mother," Gabriel said softly, "how she lived her life under your father's rule, how you were afraid you'd become her. When you held my hand, Claire, I felt like I could survive anything. I wanted to tell you that you were stronger than you believed, that you could change everything, but I was too weak. All I could do was hold your hand, your eyes, your courage. They got me through 4 years of hell." Claire's face burned. She remembered it all, their eyes locked in silence, the world falling away. She had felt something rare, something real, but he had left. "Where did you go?" she asked, her voice raw. "I woke up and you were gone. I thought you betrayed me." Gabriel's eyes darkened with regret. "I didn't leave by choice, Claire. That morning I heard cars. Your father's men, or Declan's, had tracked me down. They dragged me away, locked me up somewhere I couldn't escape. I've spent 4 years trying to get back to you. And when I found out they were forcing you to marry Declan, I couldn't stay silent. I came back to get you out of this lie." She turned to the letter in her hand, her fingers trembling as she cracked the red seal. Her mother's slanted handwriting emerged, so familiar it hurt. Claire began to read aloud, her voice small but clear, as though she wanted her mother to hear her from wherever she was. Claire, my beloved daughter, I'm sorry for raising you in a world built on lies. I spent my life in a loveless marriage, bound by expectations I never dared to defy. Your father valued the Whitmore name above all else, even my happiness. I don't want that for you. Listen to your heart, Claire. If you find someone who makes you feel free, hold on to them. I love you. Always. Claire folded the letter and pressed it to her chest, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She looked at Gabriel, the man who had returned from the shadows carrying both danger and a flicker of hope. Where did you get these? She asked. Your mother hid the journal in the cottage, Gabriel answered. I found it while investigating Harbor. The letter, she gave it to a friend to deliver, but it never reached you, until now. Before Claire could reply, Declan's voice rang out, ice cold. She's not going anywhere, Monroe. Claire belongs here. Claire turned to him, meeting his eyes head on. For the first time, there was no fear. She saw her mother in all the years of quiet suffering, and she saw Gabriel, the man who had come back to offer her the choice her mother never had. St. Augustine Church descended into a charged silence, time caught between ancient stone walls. Murmurs rose into soft gasps, scandalized and stunned. Claire stood in the aisle, her mother's letter clutched to her chest, her heart pounding like it wanted to break free of her ribs. Declan's words, "She's not going anywhere," hung in the air like a blade. But Gabriel's gaze, steady and warm, glowed like a lighthouse in the storm. Claire, he said, low but urgent, just loud enough for her to hear, if you want to leave, come with me. Now. She looked to her father, his face twisted in rage, fists clenched and advancing. To Declan, eyes narrowed, a predator coiled to strike. Then down to the letter, its handwriting a whisper from the grave. Listen to your heart. And for the first time, Claire saw it clearly. Her life, gilded and suffocating, wasn't hers. And Gabriel, though a mystery, was the only door out. She drew in a breath, clutched the journal and letter, and turned to him. Take me, she said, voice shaking but resolute. Gabriel grabbed her hand, rough, warm, familiar, and they ran. Down the aisle toward the heavy church doors, her gown rustling like a storm behind her. Her father's shout, Claire, get back here, rang out, followed by stomping feet. But Claire didn't look back. She only ran, chasing freedom into the silver light of dusk. Outside, the wind from Havenport Bay whipped through the air, carrying salt and something sweeter. Liberation. Gabriel led her to an old faded blue pickup, one window cracked. Get in, he said, yanking the passenger door open. Claire climbed in, the dress tangling at her feet, a final echo of what she'd left behind. Gabriel slid into the driver's seat and fired up the engine, its roar ripping through the stillness. They tore down the street, leaving the church and its whispers behind. Claire looked back once, catching a glimpse of her father standing at the threshold, face twisted with fury. They'll come after us, she said, her voice unsteady. My father has people everywhere. Not right away, Gabriel replied, eyes focused on the road. I left another car at the bus depot with fake tickets in the glove box. They'll think we're heading out of town. That buys us a few hours. They veered onto a narrow dirt road that led to her grandmother's old cottage, nestled between pine trees and windswept sand. It looked just like she remembered. Weathered shingles, sagging shutters, the rhythmic sound of waves beyond. We can't stay long, Gabriel said as he killed the engine. He'll check everywhere, even here if he thinks hard enough, but this gives us time to plan our next move. Claire nodded, clutching the journal like a talisman. What if they find us? She whispered. This isn't exactly a secret place. Gabriel gave her a faint, calming smile. It's not secret, but it's not the first place they'll check. Your father will search your friends' homes, hotels, airports. This house, he forgot it long ago. And you never talked about it, did you? He paused. We have a few hours, long enough to figure out how to disappear. Inside the old seaside cabin, the scent of pine wood and salt water mixed in the air, evoking distant memories of long-forgotten summers. Claire sat in a worn armchair, her wedding dress spilling around her like a cloud. Gabriel knelt by the fireplace, coaxing flames to life, the orange glow flickering across his face. Once the fire crackled, he sat across from her, hands clasped, his eyes cautious. "I need to tell you about the harbor project," he began. "It's not just about building a new port. It's a front, a massive cover for laundering money. Millions of dollars from illegal activities are being funneled through Havenport Trust Bank. Your father and Declan are behind it all. They created shell companies, forged construction contracts, and turned dirty money into legitimate profits." Claire furrowed her brow, struggling to take it all in. "But my wedding, how does that fit into it?" Gabriel leaned in, his voice low but clear. "Your wedding is part of the scheme, but it's not just about laundering money. Your father and Declan need an alliance, a power empire to dominate Havenport. Marrying you, the daughter of Lawrence Whitmore, boosts Declan's social and political clout. It positions him as your father's successor. At the same time, the wedding is a financial smokescreen. They inflate costs, millions paid to vendors, when only a fraction was actually spent. The rest is cleaned through offshore accounts. And presenting a united, powerful family keeps anyone from asking questions about the harbor project." Claire felt a chill crawl up her spine. She thought about the months leading up to the wedding, how her father controlled everything, from the guest list to the budget. She'd assumed it was about family pride, but now she saw the truth. She wasn't just a financial tool, she was a pawn in a power game. "They used me," she whispered, voice trembling. "My whole life. I've been living in a gilded cage, serving my father and Declan." Gabriel nodded, his gaze heavy with regret. "They knew you wouldn't fight back, just like your mother. But you're not your mother, Claire. You walked out of that church today. That was your first step." She looked up, meeting his eyes. Memories of the stormy night 4 years ago surged through her, the way he had held her hand, the fire in his eyes telling her she was stronger than she believed. That long-buried warmth stirred again, rising through the cracks of her pain. She wanted to trust him, to fall into the freedom he seemed to offer. But she had learned to be careful. He had vanished once. What would stop him from doing it again? "Gabriel," she said quietly but firmly, "if we do this, I need to know you won't leave me. Not again." He smiled softly, sadly, but with sincerity. "I spent 4 years trying to find my way back to you, Claire. I'm not going anywhere, but we have to move soon. I have a friend in the next city who can help us disappear. We'll leave before sunrise." Outside, the waves still lapped against the shore, and in the flickering firelight, two people who had once lost each other now tried to reconnect a fragile thread, woven from truth, longing, and an uncertain future. The sky over Havenport was a dull gray, heavy clouds veiling the town's buried secrets. Inside the cabin by the sea, Claire Whitmore sat by the window, her gaze lost in the endless blue of the ocean. But her mind tangled in the whirlwind left behind at St. Augustine. Her mother's letter, Gabriel's revelation, her choice to run. Everything had swept her away from the life she thought was her fate. But now, with the steady sound of waves in the background, a sobering truth settled in. Running isn't the same as being free. Not yet. Gabriel stood near the fireplace, firelight dancing across his worn features. He had just returned from a quick trip into town, carrying an old laptop and a tiny USB drive. "We have less time than I thought," he said, voice low and tense. "Your father's moving fast." Claire turned from the window, her brows drawn. "What's he doing?" Gabriel opened the laptop, plugged in the USB, and a video loaded onto the screen. It was a press conference at Havenport City Hall, aired live just hours ago. Her father, Mayor Lawrence Whitmore, stood behind a podium, clad in a perfect gray suit. His eyes were sharp, and his voice polished like any seasoned politician. "We've been deceived by an imposter," he declared, his voice amplified through the microphone. "Gabriel Monroe, a criminal previously wanted for slander and sabotage, disrupted my daughter's wedding. He is not a journalist, but a dangerous fraud trying to smear my family's honor." Reporters buzzed. Flashbulbs burst. Claire felt her blood run cold. She had always known her father could be ruthless. But this? Publicly vilifying Gabriel to the entire town? It wasn't just damage control. It was a calculated smokescreen. "He's making you the enemy," she whispered, stunned. Gabriel nodded, eyes never leaving the screen. That's how he plays. Distract the public. Paint me as the threat so no one questions the harbor project, but he's underestimated us. Before Claire could respond, a loud knock slammed against the door. She jumped. Gabriel held up a hand, motioning for silence. From his coat, he drew a small knife and crept to the door. He peeked through the slit, then sighed with relief and opened it. A young woman entered, blue-dyed hair, leather jacket, and a second laptop tucked under her arm. Zoe, Gabriel said, visibly exhaling. You're faster than I thought. Zoe glanced at Claire, then back to Gabriel. You owe me coffee for life, Monroe. Cracking Havenport Trust's firewall was like hacking Fort Knox. She flipped open her laptop, fingers flying, and a flood of files appeared. Bank transaction logs, forged contracts, a maze of money trails. This is the last piece you needed. Millions passed through shell corporations, all tied to the harbor project. Lawrence Whitmore and Declan Maddox are everywhere in these records. Claire stepped closer, staring at the screen. The numbers and names swirled, incomprehensible. But what mattered was clear. Her father and Declan had built an empire on lies, and she had almost become the face of it. They used my wedding to cover it all, she whispered, throat tight. Not just for money, but to sell the illusion of a perfect family. Zoe raised an eyebrow. She's a quick learner, she said to Gabriel, then looked back at Claire. The wedding was a double con. Fake vendors, inflated invoices, like paying millions to suppliers that don't even exist. And at the same time, they cemented a power union between the Whitmore and Maddox families. No one would dare question them. But your escape, you cracked their perfect story. Gabriel nodded, eyes burning with resolve. We'll send these files to a national paper, but we need time. Zoe, this is everything I've collected. Can you keep them safe? They're secure, Zoe said, pulling out the USB. But you need to move. I've heard Declan searching everywhere for her. She tilted her head toward Claire, expression grim. The words hit like a knife. Claire's chest tightened. Declan, once just a cold stranger, now felt like a real threat. Before she could speak, Gabriel's phone buzzed. He looked down. A message flashed across the screen. Come back, Claire, or Monroe won't live to see morning. Claire's breath caught. It's Declan, she said. He knows we're here. Gabriel grabbed her hand, his eyes calm but firm. He's trying to scare you. We still have time. But Claire, you need to decide. If you want out, I'll take you back. But if we keep going, there's no turning around. She looked at him, then to the journal on the table. Her mother's voice echoed in her heart. Listen to your heart. Claire knew she couldn't go back. She couldn't live like her mother, trapped by lies and fear. I'm not going back, she said, stronger than ever. But I need to see my father. He has to hear me, just once. Gabriel frowned, clearly disagreeing. It's too dangerous. He won't listen, Claire. I know, she said, her eyes hardening, but I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it for me. Beneath the dim lights of Havenport City Hall, Claire stepped into her father's office. Mayor Lawrence Whitmore sat behind a massive oak desk, phone pressed to his ear. When he saw her, he shot to his feet, eyes wide with shock, then quickly narrowing into fury. You dare come back after humiliating this family? He roared, his voice crashing like thunder. Claire stood tall, though her heart thundered in her chest. I didn't come to apologize, she said, her voice shaky but resolute. I came to tell you I won't live like Mom did. She spent her whole life in the cage you built, and I refuse to do the same. You used me, used my wedding, to launder money, to consolidate power for you and Declan. But I'm not your pawn anymore. Lawrence stormed forward, his face flushed with rage. You don't know what you're talking about, he hissed. Everything I did was to protect this family. No, Claire cut in, standing her ground for the first time in her life. You were protecting your power, and I won't let you control me, not for another second. The slap came fast, sharp, unexpected. Her cheek burned, but she didn't fall. Claire staggered, then straightened, eyes locking with his. Tears slid down her face, but her gaze didn't waver. You can hit me, she said, her voice low but razor-edged. But you can't force me to return. And I hope, for your sake, You stop what you're doing before it's too late." Lawrence stared at her, as if seeing a stranger in the face of his daughter. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Claire turned and walked out, every step a declaration. She knew Gabriel was waiting beyond those doors, and she knew the road ahead would be dangerous. But for the first time, she felt alive, truly alive, and nothing could take that away from her. Are you still following the story? Please leave your thoughts on the story in the comments below. All your comments are the motivation for us to create better stories. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thank you very much. Night fell over the shores of Havenport, casting a hush over the old wooden cabin, where only the rhythmic crashing of waves echoed like the steady breath of the sea. Silver moonlight slipped through the cracked window panes, painting soft streaks across the worn floor, like fragments of untold memories. Claire Whitmore sat in the faded armchair, her mother's journal resting quietly in her lap, though her gaze was far from its pages. She watched Gabriel Monroe standing by the fireplace, a piece of firewood in hand, the orange flames dancing across his weathered face. This house, the place where she had saved him 4 years ago, was now their hideout, a temporary sanctuary caught between truth and danger. After facing her father at City Hall, Claire felt drained to the bone, but something inside her burned with new fire. She had looked into Mayor Lawrence Whitmore's eyes, the man who had once dictated her every breath and said the words she had never dared even to think. Now, here in the stillness of this cabin, a different feeling settled in her chest. It was as if she were standing at a crossroads, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid. Gabriel set down the firewood, his gaze flicking to her, gentle but cautious. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, as though afraid to break the fragile quiet between them. Claire gave a faint smile, sorrowful but sincere. "I don't know," she admitted, her fingers brushing the frayed leather cover of the journal. "It's all too much. My father, Declan, the harbor project. And then you showed up with a truth I didn't even know if I wanted to face." Gabriel lowered himself into the creaky wooden chair across from her. "Truth is never easy," he said, his eyes locked on hers, "but it's the only thing that can set you free." She held his gaze for a long time, searching for the man she had once met in the storm, the one who held her hand and made her feel stronger than she believed herself to be. "Why do you do this, Gabriel?" she asked, voice soft but piercing. "Why become a journalist? Why chase secrets that could get you killed? You could have had an easier life." Gabriel leaned forward, fingers intertwined, the firelight flickering in his eyes. "Because I can't live with lies," he said firmly. "I grew up in a town not so different from Havenport, small, stifling. Everyone knew the truth, but they stayed silent out of fear. My father was a dock worker. He worked himself to the bone to keep us afloat, and then got screwed over by the same powerful men who promised him stability. He died because of them. So I made a promise. I would never turn away from the truth, no matter the cost." Claire listened, each word another piece of him revealed. Behind the stubbornness and sharp edges was a man shaped by loss, determined to make something right. "And that's why you went after the harbor project?" she asked. Gabriel nodded. "That project isn't just corruption, it's exploitation. Dirty money laundered through Havenport Trust, fake contracts, even your wedding. It's everything I hate, powerful people crushing the rest of us with lies. I wanted to expose them, not just for justice, but for people like my father, like your mother, like you." His words struck something deep in her. She bowed her head, gripping the journal as if it could keep her from breaking apart. "My mom," she began, voice catching. "She was the gentlest soul I knew. She loved poetry, the sea, and all the little things my father never noticed. But he consumed her. He wanted a perfect wife, a symbol of the Whitmore legacy. She smiled for the crowds, hosted grand parties, but I saw her cry when she thought no one was looking. She was miserable, Gabriel, and I let him do the same to me." Gabriel didn't speak, but his eyes were full of understanding, of pain he didn't need to voice. "You're not your mother, Claire," he said softly but firmly. "You stood up to him today. You said the things she never could. That's strength." Claire shook her head, tears shimmering in her eyes. "But I'm scared," she whispered. For the first time, I'm not afraid of him anymore. But I don't know where to begin. My whole life, everything I believed was a lie. And now, what do I even have? Gabriel leaned in, his hand reaching for hers. Warm, rough, familiar. That touch pulled her back to the night it all began, when he had held her hand in the rain and the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. You start with truth, he said, his eyes glinting with hope. What's your truth, Claire? Not the mayor's daughter, not Declan Maddox's bride. You. Who are you? His question cut deep, but not to hurt. To release. Claire inhaled, searching. I want to be free, she said, her voice shaking, but steadier with each word. I want to live a life I choose, not one I'm forced into. I want to be loved, not as an image, but for who I really am. Gabriel smiled, a real one, the first since he'd walked into the church. Then that's where we begin, he said. And I'm here, Claire. I'm not going anywhere. They sat there, hands clasped, the fire crackling in the quiet night. Claire looked at Gabriel, and in that moment, she didn't just see the man who had saved her from a wedding. She saw the man helping her rediscover herself. The feelings she'd buried beneath pain and fear rose again, not with crashing waves, but with quiet certainty, like moonlight on water, promising a new beginning. Outside, the sea still whispered against the shore, and inside the old cabin, Claire Whitmore no longer felt like she was running away. She was finally running towards something. The truth, a future, and maybe a love she never dared to dream was real. The morning sun cast a soft golden veil over the old seaside cabin in Havenport, as if trying to mask the danger creeping closer. Claire Whitmore and Gabriel Monroe sat at the worn wooden table, their eyes locked on Zoe's laptop, where financial data from Havenport Trust flickered like a labyrinth of corruption. The numbers, forged contracts, and money laundering trails were undeniable proof of Mayor Lawrence Whitmore and Declan Maddox's criminal enterprise. But for Claire, they were something else too, a devastating confirmation that her entire life had been a pawn in her father's game. Gabriel typed rapidly, his eyes sharp with focus. Zoe sent a copy of everything to a national news outlet and a contact at the FBI, he said, voice low but resolute. But the FBI will need time to investigate, and your father will use that time to destroy evidence or run. We have to release this today, publicly, during the town hall meeting at City Hall. If the people see the truth, Lawrence and Declan won't be able to silence it. Claire gripped her mother's journal tightly, her fingers brushing the worn leather cover. After the night they'd shared, after she opened up about her mother and Gabriel revealed his own past, she felt a new strength brewing inside. Still, fear lingered. Havenport is my father's territory, she murmured. He controls everything. Police, local media. If we do this, they won't let us walk away. Gabriel nodded, unwavering. I know, but that's why we have to. The Harbor Project isn't just about money. It's about people like my father who believed in false promises. Exposing it here weakens your father's grip, pressures the FBI to act faster. And Claire, he reached for her hand, rough, warm, grounding. I know you want to face him, for real this time, not just for the town, but for yourself. She met his gaze and found that flicker of hope, steady through the storm of doubt. He was right. She needed to stand up to her father in front of everyone. She needed the world to see she was no longer his pawn. Okay, she said, inhaling deeply, but we need to be careful. Declan threatened you. Gabriel gave a half smile, the kind that knew danger like an old friend. He wants us scared, but we have the truth, Claire, and we have each other. They packed quickly, laptop, USB drive, her mother's journal, and left the cabin just as the sun crested the horizon. Gabriel drove the old pickup, its tires rumbling over the uneven dirt road. Claire glanced back at the cottage one last time, her heart heavy. It had been their refuge, but she knew now it could never be home. Gabriel's phone buzzed. A message from Zoe. Meet me at the west parking lot, 9 a.m. Safe house is ready. Gabriel frowned, checking the number. Looks right, he said, but a shadow passed over his voice. We'll go, but stay sharp. They arrived at a desolate parking lot on the outskirts of Havenport, where a black van waited, windows tinted dark. Gabriel's grip tightened on the wheel. "Something's off," he muttered. "Zoe doesn't use vans like that." Before Claire could react, the van door slid open, and 4 men in black rushed out, guns drawn. Gabriel slammed the accelerator, but an SUV screeched to block them. "It's a trap," he shouted, trying to reverse. Bang! A gunshot shattered the air. A tire blew out. The truck skidded sideways and stopped. "Get out, Monroe!" A cold voice barked from the SUV. Claire froze. She recognized that voice. Declan Maddox. He stepped out, impeccably dressed in a gray suit, icy blue eyes glittering with cruelty. "Or I blow her head off right now." Claire felt the blood drain from her face. Gabriel looked at her, his expression fierce but helpless. "Don't hurt her," he growled, voice sharp as a blade. He raised his hands and stepped out. Claire followed, heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Declan approached, a smug smirk curling his lips. "Did you really think you could take us down, Claire?" he sneered. "Your father and I built an empire. Money, influence, everything. You were just a bride to complete the portrait, and you ruined it." Claire's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms. "I'm not your property," she hissed, "and I won't let you or my father use me anymore." Declan chuckled darkly. "You'll regret that." He signaled, and 2 men grabbed Gabriel, zip-tying his wrists and dragging him toward the van. Claire screamed, tried to run, but another man restrained her. His grip was like iron. "Let her go!" Gabriel roared, but a punch to the gut sent him crumpling. Claire's eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She stared at Declan, fire in her voice. "If you hurt him, I swear I'll bring you down." Declan tilted his head, amused. "You're still useful, Claire. But Monroe, he's a liability. Come back to me, publicly at City Hall, and maybe he lives." He signaled again. Claire was shoved into the SUV. Gabriel disappeared into the van, which vanished down a foggy road. The Whitmore estate rose like a fortress, all white stone columns and towering windows. Claire was dragged into her father's office, where Lawrence Whitmore waited behind his massive desk, eyes as cold as steel. The room reeked of smoke and power, but Claire no longer trembled. Now all she felt was rage, burning steady beneath her ribs. "You've disgraced me, Claire," her father said, voice low but venomous. "I gave you everything, a prestigious name, a perfect future, and you repay me by running off with a criminal?" Claire stood tall, her torn wedding gown still trailing around her ankles. "You didn't give me a family," she said, voice steady. "You gave me a cage. You used me to launder money, to cement your alliance with Declan. You turned me into a piece of your lie, just like you did with Mom." Lawrence slammed his hand against the desk, his face red. "Don't mention your mother. She knew her place, and so will you. You will remarry Declan, publicly, tomorrow. Or that bastard Monroe disappears forever. He's being held now. One word from me, and he'll never see daylight again." Claire's chest tightened, images of Gabriel beaten and bound flashing in her mind. But she remembered his words, "Start with the truth." She met her father's eyes, unwavering. "You can threaten me," she said, voice low but sharp. "But I won't live a life of regret, like Mom. And I will find a way to save Gabriel, no matter what you do." Lawrence lunged, hand raised. But Claire didn't flinch. Their eyes locked. And in that moment, she saw something flicker in his, uncertainty, as if he no longer recognized the daughter who stood before him. He turned away, his voice cold. "You have one day to decide. Declan arrives tomorrow. You'll do as you're told." Claire was dragged out and locked in her childhood room. She sat on the edge of the bed, her mother's journal pressed to her chest, fingers brushing the pages. Outside, darkness blanketed the Whitmore estate, but inside Claire a fire burned, a fierce, unyielding resolve. She would not let Gabriel die. She would not let the truth be buried. The Whitmore estate lay cloaked in darkness, the only light a faint glow from the hallway seeping under Claire Whitmore's locked bedroom door. She sat on the edge of the bed, her mother's journal clutched to her chest like a final shield. Her father's ultimatum echoed in her mind. Marry Declan, or Monroe disappears from this world. The image of Gabriel, bloodied, bound in the back of a van, haunted her with every heartbeat. She had stood up to her father, vowed not to live like her mother. But now, with Gabriel's life on the line, Claire faced an impossible choice. She took a shaky breath, her fingers trembling as she flipped through the journal's pages. Her mother's words echoed again. Listen to your heart. But her heart was torn, between the freedom she had just begun to taste and the price she might have to pay to protect the man who gave her the courage to fight. Claire knew one thing. Her father and Declan would never keep their word. Even if she agreed to the marriage, Gabriel might never walk free. But if she refused, he'd be dead before she could stop it. She needed a plan. One last chance. She stood, crossed to the worn coat hanging in the corner, and pulled out a small prepaid phone. One Gabriel had pressed into her hands back at the cabin. Use it if everything falls apart, he had said, eyes full of worry. Claire powered it on, her hands shaking as she typed a short message to Lena Carter, a national journalist who once collaborated with Gabriel. Lena, this is Claire Whitmore. Gabriel's been taken. You have the Harbor Project evidence. If I fail, release it. She attached a covert audio recording she had captured earlier in her father's office. His own voice admitting the wedding was part of a money laundering scheme and a political alliance with Declan. She hit send. Then she slipped the phone under her pillow, her pulse racing like a war drum. The next morning, Declan arrived, clad in a sharp black suit and his signature smirk. You made the right choice, Claire, he sneered. Marry me in front of the whole town, and Monroe walks. Don't try anything stupid. Claire looked him straight in the eye. Cold outside, but a storm raging within. I want to see Gabriel, she said, voice steel. If you haven't released him, I'm not walking down that aisle. Declan tilted his head, considering. Then he nodded to a nearby guard. Fine, but don't get any ideas. Your father and I have accounted for every possibility. The hastily arranged re-wedding was held in Havenport's grandest hall, a building of glittering marble and vaulted glass, designed to impress. It was packed wall to wall with social elites, politicians, and local media, all eager to witness the Whitmore family's reconciliation. National reporters were there too, summoned under the guise of a redemptive love story. Claire knew it was all theater, a desperate facade to salvage what power her father had left. She stood in the bridal suite, clad in a new white gown that clung to her like armor. She didn't see a bride in the mirror. She saw a woman forged by fire. Beneath the silk and lace, she had hidden a USB drive and a live recording device, activated the moment she entered the venue. Every word, every whisper, it was all being documented. Her final weapon. Declan appeared in the doorway, his eyes sweeping over her like a predator. Monroe's been released, he said coolly. My car dropped him outside city limits. Now do your part. Claire's fists clenched at her sides. She didn't believe him. Not really. But she nodded and stepped forward. Every step toward the aisle felt like walking into battle. Meanwhile, at a deserted construction site on Havenport's outskirts, Gabriel Monroe was dragged out of the van, wrists still bound. Two large men stood over him, iron pipes in hand, eyes devoid of emotion. Declan said we could have some fun before we finish the job, one muttered, sneering. Gabriel, blood crusted at the corner of his mouth, lifted his chin despite the pain. He's breaking the deal, he growled. Claire will never forgive him. One of the men drove a fist into Gabriel's ribs, sending him to the ground. She won't know, the other replied, lifting his pipe. But before the next blow could fall, a voice rang out from across the lot. Hey, leave him alone. A group of dock workers, rough men in boots and safety vests, rushed in, wielding shovels and crowbars. You don't belong here, one yelled. You think you can beat a man in broad daylight and get away with it? The thugs froze, then bolted, climbing back into the van and fleeing. One of the workers knelt beside Gabriel, checking his injuries. You all right, buddy? We need to get you to a hospital. Gabriel shook his head, wincing. No, I have to find Claire, he rasped. She's in danger. Back at the hall, the ceremony began. Claire walked the aisle in glittering white, but there was no joy in her gaze. Declan waited, victorious. Her father sat in the front row, smiling like a king giving away his daughter, believing the pieces had fallen back into place. But Claire had her own plan. The audio recorder beneath her dress still captured every word. The USB slipped inside a small hidden sleeve at her wrist contained Zoe's files, proof of every bank transfer, every shell company, every lie. She scanned the crowd, spotted Lena Carter near the back, her expression unreadable. Claire prayed her message had reached her. The officiant began to speak. Time seemed to slow. Claire looked at Declan, then her father, then at the faces of the crowd waiting for their perfect ending. But she remembered Gabriel's words. Start with the truth. And she knew this was her moment, to speak for herself, for her mother, for everyone who'd ever been crushed by silence and power. Claire opened her mouth to speak, and the whole hall held its breath. The grand hall of Havenport shimmered under the glare of golden lights. Marble columns gleamed as if trying to conceal the city's darkest secrets. The guest list was a showcase of power, business leaders, politicians, and reporters packed tightly into rows, murmuring about the hastily arranged re-wedding meant to salvage the Whitmore name. Claire Whitmore walked down the aisle in a flawless white gown, but there was nothing submissive in her gaze. She wasn't a bride. She was a warrior, ready to bring down a dynasty built on lies. The officiant, an elderly man with a warm, resonant voice, began the vows. Claire Whitmore, he said, do you take Declan Maddox to be your husband, to love and cherish him until death do you part? Silence fell. Claire's heart pounded in her chest. She looked at Declan, so smug, at her father, smiling like a king reclaiming his throne. And then she remembered Gabriel, the man who showed her the truth, who was likely fighting to survive because of her. She remembered her mother's letter. Listen to your heart. This was her moment. I do not, Claire said, voice clear and ringing through the mic. The room erupted, gasps, murmurs, the crackling start of chaos. Declan froze, the smugness draining from his face. Lawrence Whitmore stood abruptly, his face darkening to a furious red. But Claire didn't stop. She reached into her sleeve and pulled out a small recording device and a USB. I may have once been silent out of fear, she said, sweeping her gaze across the stunned crowd. But today, I speak for my mother, and for every woman who's ever been crushed by power. She plugged the USB into a nearby projector prepared for speeches. The screen behind the altar lit up, bank records, forged contracts, and a damning map of money flows from the Harbor Project. Gasps turned to shouts. Flashbulbs erupted. Then she hit play on the recorder, and her father's voice echoed through the hall. I don't care if Claire wants Declan. The wedding is to legitimize everything. Money through the bank, our alliance with Maddox. No one will suspect the Whitmore family. The room exploded. Reporters surged forward. Guests whispered frantically. Declan lunged for her, trying to snatch the recorder. Claire stepped back, unflinching. You can't hide anymore, Declan, she said. The whole world is watching. Her father stormed up the aisle, enraged. You dare betray me? He hissed, raising a hand. But before he could touch her, the hall doors burst open. FBI agents in Navy windbreakers flooded in. Lawrence Whitmore, one agent barked, flashing a badge. You're under arrest for money laundering, financial fraud, and conspiracy. Screams erupted. Cameras flashed. Two agents seized Lawrence, cuffing him on the altar. He writhed in protest, shouting, You can't do this! I'm the mayor of Havenport! But his voice was drowned in the chaos. Declan tried to bolt, only to be slammed to the floor and handcuffed by two more agents. Claire stood motionless. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but her eyes held firm. She watched her father and Declan dragged away, not as a daughter, not as a pawn, but as Claire Whitmore, the woman who chose truth over silence, freedom over obedience. But the victory was only half won. Gabriel Monroe was still missing, and fear clutched her heart. That's when her phone buzzed. A message from Lena Carter, the national journalist. Dock workers saw Gabriel near St. Augustine. He's badly hurt. Claire didn't hesitate. She ran, bursting from the hall, her eyes scouring the stone-paved street, her lips whispering prayers. The ocean wind stung her skin, salty and wild, but she didn't stop. And then she saw him. A crumpled figure on the roadside, just a few hundred feet from the church, blood staining his shirt, one leg twisted unnaturally beneath him. Gabriel Monroe was crawling inch by inch toward the hall, toward her. His face was pale, his breast ragged, but his eyes, those deep brown eyes, still burned with life. "Gabriel!" Claire cried, falling to her knees beside him, tears streaming down. She held him gently, cradling his battered body. He lifted one trembling hand to her face. "Claire!" he rasped. "I was trying to reach you. Are you safe?" She choked back sobs, clutching his hand. "You idiot," she whispered. "Yes, I'm safe. The FBI came. I exposed everything. It's over, Gabriel. But don't you dare leave me." Gabriel smiled faintly, blood on his lips. "Not leaving, I promised." His eyes fluttered and he went limp in her arms. Claire screamed, refusing to let go. Sirens wailed in the distance. Lena had called for help after learning his location. Paramedics rushed in, stabilizing Gabriel with IVs and bandages. Claire never let go of his hand, not for a second. "Hang on," she whispered. "Just hang on. You kept your promise. Now let me keep mine." 6 months later, the Havenport shoreline glowed under the setting sun. Golden waves lapped gently at the sand. The breeze smelled of salt and renewal. Claire Whitmore stood barefoot in a flowing sea blue dress, her toes buried in the cool sand. Beside her stood Gabriel Monroe, his walk still uneven, one leg stiff from healing bones, sleeves rolled up over sun-touched arms. He held a small wooden box in his hand, a new gift born from pain and hope. Havenport had changed. The arrests of Lawrence Whitmore and Declan Maddox rocked the town. But from the wreckage, a new community rose. Claire had turned her family's old house into the Eleanor Center, named for her mother, a refuge for women trapped in abusive marriages or controlling households. She worked tirelessly, helping others find the voice her mother never could. Gabriel, after months of physical therapy and recovery, returned to journalism, now a national name. Together, they had begun writing The Bride Who Didn't Say Yes, a memoir of survival, courage, and choosing love on their own terms. The book was already drawing national attention. Today, Gabriel had brought her back to the beach, just steps from the cabin where everything changed. He stopped in the sand, eyes glowing in the sunset. "Claire," he said softly, 6 months ago I was lying in a hospital bed, telling myself if I survived, I'd spend every moment with you. You were the reason I fought, and now I want to ask you something." Her breath caught as he knelt, opening the wooden box. Inside Dash, a silver ring etched with ocean waves, a symbol of freedom, of endurance, of everything they'd overcome. "I didn't get to ask you 4 years ago," Gabriel said, eyes locked on hers. "So I'll ask now. Claire Whitmore, will you be the woman I love forever?" Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were pure joy. She looked at the man who had nearly died for her, who had come back again and again. She thought of her mother's words, "If you find someone who makes you feel free, hold on to them." And she thought of her father, now serving time behind bars. "He was still my father," she whispered. "He did terrible things, but I've learned to let go of the anger, not to forgive, but to be free." Gabriel nodded, eyes full of quiet understanding. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known," he said, "and I want to build a life with you, with no more cages." She knelt with him, her hands cupping his face, her voice trembling but radiant. "This time," she whispered, "I know exactly who I'm marrying. And the answer is yes, Gabriel, forever." He slid the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a fierce embrace. They stood together on the sand, the waves lapping at their feet, the sunset wrapping them in golden light. Claire leaned her head on his shoulder, her heart light. Every scar, every tear had led to this. Off in the distance, Gabriel's old pickup sat on the dirt road, worn, faded, reliable. Claire laughed through her tears. "You still have that truck? It nearly didn't get you to the church." Gabriel kissed her forehead, his eyes twinkling. "It got me to you, twice. I'm never letting it go." Hand in hand, they walked the shoreline, leaving behind footprints in the sand, marks of a story scarred by pain, healed by truth, and rewritten in love.